Okay, so I've got a hack for you guys that will unlock the next level for you on guitar. Like, genuinely, once you grasp this concept, lead lines in songs, solos, jam sessions, when you're writing songs, like you name it, it will become so much more easy. And honestly, after this, I think you'll be surprised that you missed it until now. Do my best to help you think a little bit differently about the neck of your guitar and hopefully help you break out of just using a simple pentatonic scale that you've learned and you've been using time and time again. And hopefully I also want to help you view the neck of your guitar differently than just numbers on a fretboard, kind of like a tab. And the tool that I want to use to help you do this is actually really simple, but I think it'll help reframe your playing when you really need inspiration the most. And that simple trick revolves around triad chord shapes. If you have a solid foundation of triad chords, please stick with me because I'm going to be showing you how to implement them into your lead lines and solos that extend way beyond just rhythm guitar. But for those of you who aren't super familiar with triads yet, let's do a quick crash course. All right, I want you to go back to the basics and literally like the first thing you should have learned on guitar, which are open chords, or some people even call them cowboy chords. Basically, all of the traditional cowboy chords that you learned are super foundational and can be broken down into 3 notes. I mean, it's just basic music theory that we're talking about at this point. But a major chord is a 1, 3, and 5. That means your root note, the note that's 3 notes up from your root note, and then the note that's 5 notes up from your root note. All 3 of these notes get combined into a chord. So a C chord would be a C, E, and G. By the way, if you don't know basic music theory for chord structure, I highly recommend you learn as much as possible about that because it really does help. I also have a video that talks all about how to associate numbers to notes in a scale that you can watch right up here. But basically, this is where the name triad comes from. It's a chord with 3 notes in it, and tri meaning 3. If you play a G major chord, it's basically just a huge version of a triad chord. You're actually only playing 3 notes, but a few of those notes get repeated in different octaves. So you have G, B, D, and then you have G, D, B. So you're literally only playing like 3 notes in your G chord. You just repeat a bunch of them a handful of times. But it's the same thing with a C chord. So let's break down a C chord real quick. With this chord, you have a C, E, G, C, E. That's only 3 notes, but your C and your E get played twice. All we're gonna say to make this a proper triad is let's not repeat all those extra notes, and let's only play the 3 that really matter. Does that make sense? So with this G chord, instead of repeating all the notes, you can just play any of the variation of the G, B, and D notes, like this. I mean, that's an easy one because it's just open. Or you could play it like this. But that all stems from your G chord. Honestly, you could even play it in the lower octave and only play these 3 notes. Either way though, all 3 of those variations of a triad chord is a full-on G chord. But you can also move those notes around. As long as you're playing a G, B, and D, it'll work. So you could play any variation of those 3 notes anywhere on the neck and you would have a G triad chord. But there's an easier way to think about that, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Here's another easier example using that same idea. If we're playing an A chord, we would normally play it like that. However, the root note of your A gets repeated a few times in this chord. So we're just going to drop one of those A's, and I'm going to choose to remove the lowest A, the open A string, because it can sometimes just come across a little muddy, and if you remove it, it'll help you stand out more in the mix. So now you're just left with these three notes, the D, G, and B string. Now what happens if we move the shape up the fretboard? If we play it here, we get a C major chord. And that's because we have A, move it up a fret, we've got B flat, B, and then C. If you notice, this is the same exact concept as bar chords. And this also works for every single one of your basic chords. So if we take that G shape that we were talking about earlier, this one here, and we move it up 2 frets, we get an A chord. Because we have G, up 1 fret, A flat, and then A. So let's now try to figure out one of the harder chords when you first start to learn guitar. Let's play an F chord. Obviously, we don't want to play this whole full bar chord because one, I mean, we're talking about triad chords, so why would we play the whole chord? But secondly, sometimes when you're playing with a full band, having all of these notes can get really muddy in a mix. So let's go ahead and try to simplify this chord. Firstly, I would start off with trying to simplify it by removing the lowest note, which would be this F. So let's not play that. And if I remove this bar but keep the notes below it, you kind of get this like C chord looking shape. However, a lot of these notes are still repeating within the chord. So let's try to reduce it even further. So when you reduce it to just your basic 1, 3, and 5 of an F chord, you can bring it down to just these 3 notes. And this is honestly my favorite way of playing an F chord. I would call this an F-shaped triad. Now you can take this shape and you can move it up and down the neck to change the chord that it's playing. So if you take this F and you move it up 2 frets or a whole step, you're going to be playing a G chord. You can tell this is a G because the root note that used to be an F down here is now a G. But if you take this chord and you play it even all the way further up here, now this is going to be a C. But now let's do the opposite of that and say we want to play an F chord, but we don't want to play it all the way down here at the end of the neck. The easiest way to do this would to be to pick a different chord shape and then move that up the fretboard until you get an F chord. Remember, we can reduce any of the open chords to make a triad. So let's make it easy at first and take a D shape. We're going to reduce this D chord firstly by not playing the low string, the same way that I did with that F chord. And then also for simplicity, one way that you can play this D is if you flatten your index finger to bar it, instead of playing just the 2 notes, one with your index and one with your middle finger, you can just flatten it and play your D shape there. So now that is only 3 notes playing your D chord. So to get to an F with this D chord, you'll just move it up to the fretboard, You have your D, you have your E flat here, you have your E, and then F. So if you play your F chord here, you can play it up here as well. It has a different tonal quality, but it's the same exact chord. Another shape that is easy to use is your A chord shape. If you take this and move it up here, you're going to be playing an F there as well. So that's the basic concept of triad chords. This concept is mainly used for rhythm guitar in big bands where full chords would just make a mix too muddy. However, a lot of modern worship music uses this triad chord shape idea as a starting point when writing lead lines. Raise a Hallelujah is a classic example of that. chorus lead lines and the solo sections at the end are all based on triad shapes. The chorus is just picking through the chords with a specific type of triad shape, and the solo at the end revolves around an E-shape triad that's playing D flat, which is the key that the song's in. Oftentimes, when you learn a lead line in a song that's based on these type of triad chords, all they're doing is playing around with a major or minor scale in the box shape that that triad chord falls in. Been So Good by Elevation Worship is another great example of this, and so is Take You at Your Word by Cody Carnes. If you're curious to see what I'm talking about in these songs, by the way, I have those guitar tutorials that I made for both those songs linked in the description. So now let's try to build an instrumental around this concept. Imagine you're on stage on a Sunday morning and you're in a flow section during maybe a sermon or something, and you just want to add some melody over top of what the band and the instrumentation's doing behind you. So I have a typical piano piece that we can play over right now that's in the key of C, and I'm going to take a handful of different triad chord shapes that are the C chord, just different shapes, and I'm going to play around with the notes surrounding that chord to find a melody. This is a great way to break out of that traditional pentatonic scale that everyone learns and sometimes gets stuck in. And hopefully it'll also help you think more about chord structure and melody than just basic, simple scales and numbers. So I'm going to be playing a C here, which is kind of like in that pentatonic scale box. You'll see when I start playing that it is a lot of that pentatonic right there in that box. But I'm also going to play a C up here as well, which is a completely different tonal part of the neck. It jumps up a whole octave. And then another place that I'm going to play C is that F-shaped triad chord that we just talked about right here. But I'm just going to ad-lib and improvise a little bit until I can find a melody that I like, and then we're just going to go with it and see what happens. And of course, you can use this idea to build full guitar solos and parts to actual songs. Most guitar parts are all built around this triad shape concept. And once you start looking at the fretboard through that lens, it's honestly really hard to unsee the thought process that someone went through when writing those guitar parts. So I want to challenge you to really pay attention to triad shapes. Do your best to learn as many as possible and then experiment with them on Sunday mornings. I really think that once you grasp this concept, it'll help you become a more dynamic player. And then when you pair this concept with the Nashville number system, which I talk about here, it will be a really massive game changer for you, and it will help upgrade your confidence and your playing ability with a professional team.